I'm here today with Lucy Cohen, who is the co-founder of Mazuma, the UK's first subscription-based accountancy service. She spotted a gap in the market for low-cost, hassle-free accountancy services and founded the company in 2006 at the age of 23. Her debut book, The Millennial Renaissance, was released in 2017, and her second book, Forget the First Million, won the Best Short Business Book category at the Business Book Awards 2022. She's also, brilliantly, a former British champion powerlifter, and she's a campaigner and a startup mentor with the Prince's Trust. I mean, basically, Lisa, I just want to talk about powerlifting, but I suppose we have to talk about books because
we could do both. We can talk about both, yeah.
I'm sure we can draw out some parallels there. Anyway, welcome to the show, Lucy. It's very, very good to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
And let me start with congratulations. How did it feel when they called your name out?
I was really surprised. First of all, I was sat next to Mary-Anne Seacart, who wrote The Authority Gap, and I'm a big fan of hers, and I was not cool. I was trying desperately to be cool, and within about 90 seconds of her sitting down, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm the biggest fan!" And the poor woman, was like, "Oh, who's this lunatic?"
I'm going to sit next to this woman all dinner now.
Yeah, I've got to make polite conversation with this fangirl. But it was fine. We're friends now.
You BFFs.
So that for me, that was already
You'd already won.
Win. I'd already won at that point. But when I didn't think I was going to get nervous, because I've been to a lot of kind of over the years with Mazuma, I've been to a lot of kind of different business awards and stuff, and you kind of you have your grateful, disappointed face, like, oh yes, they're a very deserved winner, you do all that. And so I was kind of prepared to do that, or be like, oh well, it's been a nice evening, I met some really great people. And then when they did the highly commended, I'm like, well, I didn't win highly commended, I've probably not won, because there were some other great books in my category. I was like, well, that's okay, I got nominated and that's brilliant, and the book sold really well. And then when they called my name out, I was just a bit blown away, really.
Were you
it
cool?
was a bit of a no, not really. No,
Good.
I'm really epically uncool all the time. Just a massive nerd, really. So it was all a bit of a blur, and I couldn't believe it, really, because it's really, I sort of do this thing where I forget that anybody reads anything I ever write. So whether that's like content I produce for the business, or stuff I post on LinkedIn, or articles I've written for other people, I genuinely, once it's left kind of my cloud, my end, I'm like, oh, I've done that thing, and I completely forget that I don't do this in a vacuum, and that other people read my stuff. And it's really strange to me when people will come up to me and then reference something of mine that they've read or that they've really enjoyed. I wrote a piece probably just over a year ago. I was very poorly last year, and I wrote a piece about that for Accounting Web online. And it's just kind of, I not only am I epically uncool, but I'm an avid oversharer. The two probably very much go hand in hand. And I'd written this piece about having been ill, and it making me realize, like, kind of love what I do, and even though it's challenging, it gives me purpose and all that stuff. And people still come up to me and say, oh, that piece you wrote really resonated with me. And I just forget that it exists out there in the world, that these words that came out of my brain exist out there and other people read them. So for that reason, winning that award for my book was just really surreal, because it goes off into the ether, and I forget that anyone else ever reads the words I've written. So apart from when it got launched and the publishers were like, right, great, yeah, this is the launch date, and I suddenly, for the first time in my life, had this real sense of imposter syndrome. And then people were like, oh, I'm going to pre-order it, and I'm going to order your book. I was like, okay, you can order it, but please don't read it. Like, you can order it and buy it and put it on your bookshelf, but please don't read my book. Like, I don't want you to read the words. So yeah, it was a really strange feeling.
Oh, wow. I mean, there's so much there. Okay, so the imposter syndrome thing, hilarious. I'm in the same position at the moment, just sent my manuscript in, and I wanted to tell the copy editor, don't read it, it's a bit crap, don't read it.
Yeah, literally, that's what you're like, isn't it? Like, you spent all these hours, like, pouring your soul into this thing, and like obsessing over words, and then you think, right, great, done, you feel really good about it, and then off it goes. You're like, oh, no, don't read it. Like,
no,
don't read
please.
that thing.
No,
please
don't judge me.
It.
Don't judge me.
Yeah.
And another thing about writing, that whole kind of time travel magic of it, where, the thing that was in your brain then, somebody's reading it, and it's almost like you're connecting brain to brain through this kind of portal of a book. Years later, centuries later, if you think about, how writing works, it is absolutely astonishing. Yeah. And the half-life of a book. So, that if you're in social media stuff, you post a video, a tweet or something,
Mm.
you kind of do forget about it. Everybody's forgotten
Yeah.
about it, unless you've gone viral for all the wrong reasons, Basically, it's gone, it's out. It was of the moment and in the moment.
Yeah.
And a book, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's years of half-life. So it's really interesting when you're writing, just keeping that in mind.
Yeah, and it's something that I always forget. But also I also forget what I've actually written. So I can't. I quite often go back, or say quite often. That sounds terrible, but I'll sometimes come across stuff I've written, especially like in the business or content I've done, or an article I wrote maybe a couple of years ago. And we evolve and grow as writers, and
Yeah.
our style changes, and I read some of the stuff I wrote kind of 8 years ago and cringe. I'm like, oh god, that's awful. But then sometimes I go back and I read something I've written a couple of years ago, I'm like, this is great. And actually,
Who wrote this?
I don't remember writing a single word of this, but yet here it is, clearly, like in my Google Docs. Like, yeah, it's weird.
I remember I had Seth Godin was on the podcast a couple of years back now, and I said to him a quote that he said, "Oh, did I say that?" I often have to go back and check what I said.
Exactly
I
that. Like,
often Google my own quotes.
I don't know what comes out of my mouth 1 minute to the next. It's as much of a surprise to me as it is to everyone else. So yeah, same with writing, I think.
Brilliant. Now, about the book itself, I'm going to talk to you about writing again properly in a minute, but it's such an interesting way of approaching it, isn't it? Because there's so many books telling you how to make the first million, and you're like, forget the first million. People, wise up. So tell us where that came from and what the impulse behind it was.
Yeah, so it look, I come from I grew up in business, if you like. I started my business when I was 23, and we started at this time where it was kind of all Dragon's Den and high growth awards and fast growth this and who can get to seven figures in 15 seconds and all that stuff. And I bought into it, and I went on that journey, and after about 4 years I was poor and miserable, and I was like, why have I done this? And I felt like a fraud, because I felt like all these awards I was going to, or people kind of talk about how great we were, it just felt, it didn't feel right, because the day to day was such a struggle, and it made me think about kind of what that journey as a business owner looks like. And look, don't get me wrong, wanting to accumulate, and I do say within the book, wanting to accumulate a degree of wealth for yourself, I'm pro that. Like, you, most people go into business to lead a better life, and money being the thing we exchange in for goods and services, money does make your life easier. Having an amount of money to facilitate your lifestyle definitely makes your life easier. So I'm not saying you don't have to make any money. Look, there's nothing wrong with having an ambition of being wealthier than you were when you started. It just can't be the only thing you focus on. Because if that's the only thing that you're chasing, you will never have enough. You will never be happy. You need to find more purpose and other ways to get fulfillment from what you do. Also, if that's the only thing you're focusing on, you're missing a bunch of good stuff and a bunch of opportunity along the way. So the reason I say kind of like forget the first million is that, look, you get it right, you get your processes right, you get your payment systems right, you get your sales pipeline right, that will follow, but you can't just focus on that. It's like being stood at the bottom of a mountain, and instead of thinking I need to walk up this step by step, going I'm going to leap up in one giant bound right to the top, you can't do it. When you do any kind of endurance sport, and let's running a business is an endurance sport, it's a marathon, not a sprint. When you do any sort of endurance sport, you focus on the next thing you're doing, the next half a mile, the next 10 steps. Can I get to the next point? And in fact, there's a few kind of really great sort of survival books of people who've kind of, like, I don't know, fallen down ice wells, or underneath avalanches and stuff like that, and they're just thinking, right, how do I get to the next place that gets me to the next place? And that's the focus. If you keep doing that in your business, that wealth and that success will follow. But if you start going, I want to go from zero to being a multimillionaire in 3 weeks, you're probably going to be quite disappointed, and you're probably going to make the wrong decisions along the way, and you'll be miserable. So it's kind of about that, really.
And you make such a good point about how what even is a million anyway?
What
Is
is
that
it?
turnover? In which case,
Yeah,
if your costs are 950 million, you're not doing so well, are you?
exactly.
950,000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Is it cash in bank? Is it net worth?
yeah. Is it liquid assets? Yeah.
It's a completely meaningless number, and we've got this very emotional attachment to the word
Yeah.
million.
Who wants
Um,
to be a millionaire?
it's a
We
cultural
all
thing.
do.
This time next year we'll be millionaires, Rodney. It's this whole and £1 million now is a lot less than it was even 10 years ago. It's
Buys you a 2-bed flat in London, doesn't
well,
it?
exactly, yeah. Buy you a small allotment in Hampshire. So, so it's a lot less money, and it's all relative. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's not about not making money. It's not about not having a successful business. It's about this kind of concept of strong foundations, getting your ducks in a row, and then the rest will follow. I kind of equate it to crash dieting. If you start off at the start of a whatever journey, fitness journey or whatever you want to call it, with well, I haven't reached the end goal immediately, so therefore it's not worth it. It's the same in business. Like I said, it is a marathon, not a sprint, and it's just focusing on what the next day and celebrating the goals. I quite often
Yeah.
I quite often joke that I wish I had last year's problems, because every problem you have, it feels awful at the time, and then as you kind of grow up in business and you develop, the problems you face become more sophisticated. And I'm like, I wish I had last year's problems. They were a breeze compared to this year's problems. And then next year I'll be seeing the same thing. So
And that's the important piece, isn't
yeah,
it? Is that actually, because I now know that future me or present me has solved last year's me's
yep,
problems, and it wasn't that hard, I
yep,
know that future me will have solved this year's problems. And
absolutely,
yeah,
yeah.
there's a resilience that kind of comes with that knowledge, isn't there?
Yeah, I once saw a therapist, and they said something very wise to me, and it's always really stuck, which is, so far you've survived everything in your life, and as an anxiety sufferer, that really rings true. Like, yeah, so far
Mm,
I've survived everything in my life, including things which really should have killed me. So, yeah, that's it. It's knowing that is very much a journey.
yeah. And you've mentioned how your own business experience and that kind of misery underneath the apparent
Mm.
success, was a factor in this book. I'm guessing because you've worked with so many small businesses, you must have seen that repeated time and time and time
Oh,
again.
it's ubiquitous. It's
Mm.
it's
And it's the dirty little secret, isn't it, of
it is.
entrepreneurship? It looks so glossy on Instagram.
It is a dirty little secret, and it's funny because people will say to me like, "Oh, you're so brave sharing all this stuff." I'm like, "It's not brave. Everyone's going through this." And the number of people who come to me saying, "Oh, I'm so glad you said that because I feel exactly the same way."
Yeah.
Like, imposter syndrome, feeling like a fraud, all that stuff. You kind of have to you deal with that on a daily basis, and also, you know, I think protecting yourself from what it looks like other people are doing. I try to be quite honest, but even me, as someone who's quite honest, my Instagram reel or my Twitter or whatever else is very much a highlight reel, because when I'm having an absolutely terrible day, I don't really feel like engaging with the world. And sometimes I'll go back and post something in hindsight and go, actually, 6 months ago this happened and it was awful, but I didn't do it in the moment. You just don't
Yeah.
know what someone's going through. So I think it's always really important to remember that it's never what it looks like on the surface. There's always stuff going on. Everyone's got stuff to deal with. But not only that, everyone has the same problems. So if you're worried about your cash flow, everyone else is too. If you're worried, there are very few businesses that aren't worried about their cash flow. It's part of business. If you're worried about how are you going to deal with the cost of living crisis with your staff and putting their salaries up, and inflation? Everyone else is too. If you're worried about upskilling teams or hiring good staff, everyone else is too. Um, what you're going through, it feels so personal, and sometimes when lots of things go wrong in a row, it can feel like it's like a personal attack on you by the universe. It's not. Everyone's doing it. No, no one's saying it. Like, yeah, we've had some real challenges the last obviously couple of years with COVID and everything else, and yeah, it has just felt like and then it's the next thing and the next thing. I'm like, I'm tired of living through remarkable events now. I'd really like 10 years of being really
Yeah.
boring. If we could do that'd be
Oh,
great.
hallelujah.
Oh,
Yeah. Wouldn't it be
I'd love
wonderful?
a few boring years. That'd be great.
Mm,
I'd love that.
yeah, I hear you. I hear you. What was really struck me about the book as well is that it does feel like a kind of cru de coeur. It does feel like a very generous act. A lot of people look at writing a business book as a sort of business card,
Mhm.
as a way of promoting their
Yeah.
business. And yours doesn't feel like it. Just feels like, people, you need to know this.
As an avid oversharer, that's kind of like just all it is, really. And I think it kind of, a lot of people said like, why did you write it? And the same with my kind of first kind of foray into writing. I've always written I suppose I've always written things that I wish I'd been able to read when I was me
Yeah,
5 years ago. I wish that I wasn't just reading business books about if you apply this strategy, if you don't double your profits in 15 minutes, then there's something wrong with you and all this stuff. I wish that I hadn't read all that stuff. And I wish that someone had been really honest with me about what this journey is and what it continues to be. So I can only write from my heart. That's the only place I can write, and it means that my editors hate me because I'm constantly basically all my manuscripts are covered in reference question mark reference question marks reference question marks, and I'm like, I'm sure it exists. Like, Lucy,
I heard it
like,
once.
yeah, I've
It's
heard
on the
it somewhere.
internet.
That's enough. Yeah, very much the red top style of referencing my work. A source said, but yeah, it's obviously you have to reference this stuff. But it's yeah, I can only write from my heart, and if people resonate with it and people like it, which they seem to, then that's great. But if not, then it's a very drawn out and stressful form of therapy, I suppose.
But if they don't like it, it is at least short. And I wanted to talk to you about
Exactly.
that. Was that a decision? Was that a conscious decision? Or did you just come together? That's the end of it. That's it.
I mean, I have the attention span of a gnat, so there's a little bit of that in there. But I think that look, most business books you read, you come out of it and you probably remember 3 or 4 things from it. Like, there's probably maximum maybe 1 or 2 things that have massively resonated with you, and a couple of sentences that have stuck in your brain, and you leave that book going, that was a great book, I remember that thing from it. And that's probably all you remember from it, unless you're someone who kind of reads books over and over and over again and sort of studies them. You're not out there quoting paragraphs of I know, Keats or something when it comes to business, whatever the equivalent is. You're just not. You read it, it's quick, you take something from it and you move on. And I did deliberately want to do something short because first of all, it's less work for me, but secondly, that's the way I digest things, and I love a quick, sometimes you need a quick, short, sharp, boom, this is what we're going to go, and that's enough to get something out of it. I do. Lots of people ask me, like, do I do business coaching or whatever else? I'm like, no, I don't. I've got no interest in putting together a 6-month, 18-step program where I'm going to take you through all these things. But what I do is 1 hour short, sharp sessions as a one-off, which is probably just enough to get you over that little hump you're feeling. And then you can move on and go on to something else. And that's kind of how I felt the book was. I felt that it was something to a kind of a set of ideas based off my experiences, something that people will hopefully read it and go, oh, yeah, me too. Yeah, and actually, okay, yeah, I'm going to try that, and then go away, and that's it. I just wanted to be short, actionable, yeah, and concise. Really, the complete opposite of the way I talk, which is just rambling.
You said it before about writing being part
Yeah.
therapy, which I thought was really interesting, and I totally
Yeah.
get. What does writing look like? Well, when you have that kind of itch to write, do you just sort of, sit and put the words on the page and flow, or do you sort of plan it all out with post-it notes? Where do you start and how does
Oh,
it
there's no
work?
planning. There's that.
Of
There's
course
no
there's not.
planning. So I do get flow, and I can find flow, which is good. I can't write sat at a desk. I don't know what it is. I've got a really nice little desk set up, and I can't, with fancy monitors, I can't write at a desk. I have to write sort of in the least ergonomic position possible, where I'm kind of like lying half prone on a sofa, with kind of propping my laptop up on my chest, like a small T-Rex.
No wonder it had to be
Yeah,
short.
I'll give myself a horrible backache. And that's how I write. And I don't know whether it's that's when I tend to find that I flow best, and I tend to just go and I just let it all happen. And sometimes it's absolute junk. And I am one of these people who believe in getting into a habit. So when I wrote the book, it was habit. I made myself get up every day, and even if I didn't feel like it, I just wrote for an hour, first thing in the morning, before my brain could get distracted by the business and other stuff like that. So I did kind of do that golden hour in the morning. And that was really valuable, because sometimes I wrote and it was absolute junk, and I was like, well, never mind, I'm going to literally just delete it and move on. But I got into that habit.
Yeah.
So, like anything, like I'm unsurprisingly absolutely rubbish at meditation. But people tell me you can practice it and get better at it, and I feel like writing is that for me. Is that you can practice it, get better, and I can get into that sort of flow state a little bit better. But no, I tend not to plan. I tend to find that I'll kind of splurge all the words out, and then I'll sort of leave it and go away and then come back and read it again maybe a couple of days later. And at that point then you start doing the stuff of going, oh, I've said that twice, or actually no, that works better that way around, or actually I really should put something in here. And I suppose that's the more structured element to it. But that initial kind of creative output is very much it usually starts as a little like niggle of an idea in my head, and then I can't let it go, and I start thinking about fun words. And I was just talking to someone earlier today about words I hate, and my current hit list. There's an advert on TV at the moment for pucker, and I hate that word. I hate it so much. Pukka. It's ugly. It sounds horrible. It's driving my husband mad because every time this advert comes on, I'm like, oh, I hate that word, or it like makes me cringe. But I start thinking, I know when I'm onto a little idea with writing, because I start thinking about words I like and words I've heard and how they sound and work in sentences, and then I know, okay, I'm ready. And then at some point, it's never when I plan it really, at some point I'll think, I'll just write a couple of sentences, and before I know it, 3 hours has disappeared and my back hurts and I'm dehydrated and I need to stand up.
That's hilarious. What you're describing is how you make the invisible visible, isn't it? It's how the inkling becomes words on a page, and I mean, you're doing the classic Hemingway: write drunk, edit sober.
That's exactly it. All my best ideas happen after a large glass of red wine. It's not.
Yeah, or at least
There's
it feels
truth
that
in
way.
that. Yeah, I definitely think they're better at the time than maybe they are 2 days later.
Now I want to know about the powerlifting thing, though. Tell me how powerlifting relates to one or both of running a business or writing a book.
Oh, good question. So I started powerlifting late, really, considering the kind of age of lifters now. But I was kind of in my late 20s, and I was wanting to do something with my body that wasn't about what it looked like. I wanted to do something useful.
Yeah.
And I started seeing a PT, and he was like, "Oh, you're freakishly strong. You you should
Why,
like."
thank you.
I was like, "Thanks, I think." You should enter a competition. So I did, and I won it, and then I met other powerlifters and kind of got into it. So I ended up, not one to ever do anything by halves. I ended up representing Wales, and then I ended up representing Britain. So I actually been to World Championships and European Championships and stuff like that as part of the GB team. And I think that um, it just how it relates to business and specifically the book. Actually, it's that thing of when I started powerlifting, I was not as strong as I was at my peak. I didn't start off being able to squat 180 kilos. I started off being able to squat 50 kilos, and then the next goal was, oh, maybe I could do 80, and then maybe I could do 100. And then the more advanced you get in it, the smaller those gains are, because you've got your kind of newbie gains, and then you have to chip away and chip away and chip away. And I had a really good coach say that every competition you should try and just add 2.5 kilos to each of your lifts. He's like, because in a year, 4 competitions a year you might do, that's 10 kilos on each leaf, or that's however many kilos on your total. And instead of going, I want to go from a 400 kilo total to a 600 kilo total, you just chip away, and suddenly 5 years later you look back and you're like, oh, that time that seemed like an amazing total, and now I'm disappointed with this total. And that's like running a business, is that you never really look back at, you're always looking forward. You don't tend to look back at where you've come from, and it's a real lesson in chipping away at that. I've mentioned a couple of times, I talk about it in the book, that I was really ill, and I had arterial blood clots, which have quite severely damaged my right leg, and I couldn't train, couldn't lift for a long time. And earlier this year, very humbling, got myself back into the gym and had to learn to lift all over again. So started off and I couldn't squat 40 kilos, which and a few weeks back I posted something on social media where I'd got myself back up to be able to squat 100 kilos again. And that 100 is nowhere near what my top was before. But given the context, that triple figure thing was a huge deal. And again, that's like business. It's about the context and the progress. A lot of businesses have really struggled the last couple of years because of COVID, and you go, well, we haven't grown as much as we wanted, and we've not done this and we haven't done that, and I really wanted to be here by now. And it doesn't help that kind of culturally in the UK, at least, everyone seems to have completely forgotten about COVID. So we're forgetting that kind of over 2 year period where everything was up in the air and thrown off center, and we didn't know how to progress and didn't know what the future looked like. Everyone's forgotten about that. And we need to remember that in context, we all basically, I'm refusing to add 2 years to my age now. I'm just minusing 2 years off my age now because I don't think it's fair that
It
I
doesn't
didn't,
count.
like, I stayed in the house for 2 years. I don't think it's fair that I have to count an extra 2 years on my age. I'm going back.
I love that.
Let's take a pause, but
Let's just everybody agree that those
we'll
2 years
wind
just
them
didn't
off.
count.
Just wind them off our ages. I think
Yeah.
that's only fair.
Yeah, if we all agree it, I think that's a really great. We could maybe just make it a kind
Yeah.
of global
Yeah,
constitutional
motion
point.
passed. That's me done. I'll second that.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think
yeah.
and that's in business. Yeah, all right. You might not be as far along as you want to be, or maybe you're maybe a little bit behind where you were at the start of 2019. But look at what happened, and look at you're still here and you're resilient, and then carry on. So yeah, for me, it's kind of there's some really good parallels there, and about dedication and perseverance and overcoming obstacles and all that good stuff as well. Plus, it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy being strong because it surprises a lot of people. And it's genuinely quite useful in your day-to-day life. Being able to
Mm,
hoik stuff about the house without any help. It's just really handy being strong. It's useful.
yeah. I just had to carry the dog back home. She's 20 kilograms, and I
You're
was feeling it by
not
the
an
end.
insubstantial weight that to carry over a long time. That's a whole sack of cement. There we are.
Yeah, except and
Doesn't
cement
wriggle
doesn't
and
wriggle.
have a cone of shame in your face. So it's yeah. If anything, you've done a stellar job there.
I felt good. Yeah. I always ask people for their best tip for
Mhm.
new writers. And this it just feels a little bit greedy now because you've given us really loads. But if there's somebody who's just, I mean, I'm guessing the tip probably isn't, lie in a really ergonomically unsatisfactory position
Get drunk. Yeah.
and write.
Get drunk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and have a glass of wine. Maybe that is it. But what would you sort of say to people if they are thinking, I do want to
Oh,
write a
just
book, but
don't
I don't know where to
overthink
start?
it. Just do it. Like you can't
Yeah,
like that kind
just
of
start.
like paralysis by analysis that I think a lot of writers get. Look, I'm a big believer in it's better that it's done than it's perfect. My book is not perfect. I'm sure if I read it back again, there's no better way to find things you don't like in your book than have it published and have people buy it and then go, actually, I don't like that bit. um, there's no better way of finding a typo either, which no one spotted in the whole editing process. Yeah, publish it.
This has
Yeah,
gone past three
publish it.
editors. How
Let
is this
people buy it,
possible?
and then let
Yeah.
someone on Amazon tell you that they found a typo. That's the best way of doing
Yeah.
it. No, just get on with it. And it, do you know what? It doesn't matter if your first attempts are absolute rubbish because the process of doing it, you've learned something in. And you do develop as a writer. It's a skill. It's a practice. Just like you might be able to ride a bike, but could you ride a bike well? Are you the same? There's riding a bike and then there's Tour de France. It's the same activity, but it's the same motions but very different things. And writing's like that. Play with words, play with your style. Have a bit of fun with it. I quite like an informal writing style, but it's not for everyone. Some people naturally write very formally. Well, if that's not your natural style of how you write, then go with it. I write kind of how I talk, like way too many words in a sentence and a lot of regret. But yeah, just have fun with it and just don't overthink it. And it doesn't matter if no one else ever reads those words. For now, just get on with it and do something and create something because it's actually going back to the bike thing. You can't learn to ride a bike by reading a book about it. Like you just have to do it. And I think it's the same in writing. So yeah, just get on with it. Really, get some words down.
And to pursue that analogy, you can't
Yeah,
steer until you're
absolutely. Yeah,
moving.
spot on. You've just got to, and you will surprise yourself at kind of, eventually you're kind of that kind of state of flow. I didn't realize I was doing it probably until years later, and I was, like I said, reading stuff. I was like, I don't remember writing that, and then I realized, okay, that's when I'm doing my
Yeah.
best stuff because I'm in a really kind of flow state. And if you can find a way to get yourself in there, then it all becomes a lot easier. It just kind of works.
Well, of course, getting a bum on the seat in
Oh
golden
yeah,
hour or whenever it is, but in a disciplined way,
it
it doesn't just
doesn't.
happen if until you're actually
Yeah,
there with a pen and
it
the
doesn't.
paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. I always ask people to recommend a book as well. And you're not allowed to
Oh,
recommend Forget the First
shoot.
Million, so I'll do it for you. It's really, really good. Read it. But what book would you recommend that people listening to this podcast should read, or what's been
Oh,
particularly
now this is
meaningful
a bit
to
of a
you?
weird one, and I've been recommending this book for a little while, but they've now made a TV series of it, so it feels like it's cheapened it a little bit for me. But if you're a businessy person, or even just kind of enjoy kind of investigative journalist style reading, the Bad Blood, the Theranos story, is a fantastic fantastic read. That book is so well written. That's a really good read. The other two, which if like me you're a feminist, then you should definitely read Marianne Sieghart, because her book The Authority Gap's amazing, and Invisible. Yeah, she
She's
is
a friend of
now. Well,
yours, isn't she?
she doesn't
Yeah.
know it yet, but she, and Invisible Women by Caroline Correa de Perez, if you want to just get really angry about everything.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
furious. I still am, really,
I've
for
read it a couple of
weeks and months
times
after
and it
reading
just
that. Yeah.
makes me livid. But actually, like the investigative journalist style one, the bad blood, it's called. That's
Somebody else has recommended that, and I still haven't read
it's
it. I'm okay.
it's very
I'm
gripping.
told now.
I was surprised how into it I was, because I thought, that's quite an interesting founder story. But actually, he writes incredibly well. So yeah, it's a very good book.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Lucy, if people want to find out more about you, more about Mazuma, more about your books, where do
So
they go?
I'm pretty prevalent on the socials. So LinkedIn, I'm Lucy Cohen, and then Twitter, etc. I'm at Lucy Mazuma. So you can find me there. You can get in contact with me via my website, which is I think this is right, lucycohen.uk. I hope that's right. Yeah, I'm pretty
I'll
certain
double
that's
check.
right. Or the Mazuma website, which is mazumamoney.co.uk. You can probably find contact details me there. But I'm pretty much on social media 24/7, because I'm a millennial and my phone's glued to my hand.
Marvelous. Good. It's amazing you find time to write. Great. It's been such a joy talking to you. Thank you, and thanks for sharing the business stuff, the powerlifting stuff, the personal stuff.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Really
Thanks so much
appreciate
for having
it.
me on.